Please now welcome our final speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Hugh Smith and his thesis, Why America Should Support Nuclear Reactors.
Growing up, my family and I spent a lot of time driving to and from San Diego. On the drive down to San Diego, we'd always pass by these two massive domes right on the coast. My parents made a game where we used to make up ideas for what these two domes could be. Stuff like water slides or a massive bowling ball that was cut in half. They never really explained what they were because it would ruin the game. But a few years later, I was genuinely curious and decided to look them up. And I discovered that those two massive domes were part of a nuclear power plant called the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, which was shut down in 2012. When San Onofre was shut down, many locals in neighboring cities and in San Onofre were relieved, but experts regarded the shutdown as just another anecdote of the public condemning a technology that they didn't understand. This surprised me. Well, usually, experts and public will disagree anytime there's a new technology introduced. After all, with the introduction of the home television set in the early 1900s, many people believed it would just be a fad. But 20 years later, everybody knew that they weren't going anywhere. But with nuclear reactors, it's different. Tension between the public and experts have been high ever since 1942, ever since the first reactor was developed. It has been more than 80 years since then. And nuclear reactors are not something as trivial nor as novel as a home entertainment system. There are disagreements present in all levels of nuclear power, but the most prevalent are the disagreements with nuclear waste and how it should be treated. Nuclear waste is waste that is created from the core of a reactor as it undergoes its natural processes. Eventually, this nuclear waste must be transported into a long-term storage facility, but these have yet to be implemented on a wide scale. Recently, however, Finland made massive steps towards the development of one of these facilities, but again, many people vehemently opposed a similar facility being built in the US. Reactor experts again thought that the public had a baseless hatred for nuclear reactors. I believe that such disagreements are important. After all, they open conversations that ultimately result in cheaper operations and safer development. But the disagreements on nuclear power have long outlasted their usefulness. After all, nuclear waste is currently cost-effective and relatively safe. There will always be some danger when handling nuclear waste, but enough danger has been mitigated so that the treatment of it is reliably safe. Now, public and expert debates have devolved into shouting matches, where each side believes blindly that they're right without even listening to what the other side is saying. Which is why today I will attempt to debunk the debate on the most controversial aspect of nuclear power by showing that nuclear waste can be treated safely and effectively, while also limiting environmental damage. In order to understand why so many people believe nuclear waste is more dangerous than it really is, it's important to understand what nuclear waste is in a material sense and how it is treated. As stated earlier, nuclear waste comes from the core of a reactor undergoing its natural process called fission. Fission is a reaction where an atom will be broken up and it will create an enormous amount of energy. In a nuclear reactor, this enormous amount of energy is used and created into and turned into power. But the byproduct of this are many materials that the reactor cannot use. This is known as nuclear waste, the materials that the reactor is unable to use but are still radioactive. Eventually, once this waste piles up, it is then transported to a cooling tank, which is a large vat of water that serves to both cool down and store the nuclear waste, while also lowering the emission of radioactive energy. Eventually, once the nuclear waste has cooled enough, it is then taken to an above-ground storage facility called a dry cask. Dry casks are classified as short-term storage facilities because they must eventually be taken to an underground facility. This is because If left above ground, nuclear waste would cause an enormous amount of damage to the environment. But if stored in an underground facility, no matter how long it lasts, the nuclear waste would not emit enough radiation to penetrate through the rock, nor would it be able to affect the environment. Public concern comes from the vulnerability of these facilities and the inherent dangers that come with nuclear waste. But it's important to understand how durable the containers that nuclear waste are both transported and stored are. In 1984, a company that transports nuclear waste set up an experiment where a 200-ton train traveling at upwards of 60 miles an hour would collide in a head-on collision with one of these storage units. The result was that the storage unit had virtually no damage, and the internal pressure hadn't changed at all. These units, these storage facilities, are so durable that there is almost nothing that could destroy them. The biggest threats to these are erosion and earthquakes, but even these two things can be mitigated. For a facility to be considered safe for nuclear waste, it must both be low enough, it must be in a location that limits both erosion and earthquakes. As William Martin, a professor of nuclear engineering at the University of Michigan, says, extreme care must be taken to ensure that nuclear waste is stored both safely and securely, preferably deep underground in permanent geological repositories. These permanent geological repositories, or storage facilities, must be below groundwater sources to limit erosion, and far away from tectonic fault lines to limit any impact of earthquakes. Now, these criteria may seem far too difficult for any long-term underground storage facility to be plausible. But the storage facility in Finland is exactly that. It is an underground storage facility that meets these criteria. The Onkalo Spent Nuclear Fuel Repository in Finland began excavation in 2004 and is planned to finish construction sometime in 2023, with operations starting later this year. And although it was no doubt difficult to find a location both accessible to nuclear waste transportation facilities and to actually build this facility, it shows that it is possible, and that nuclear waste can be safely handled in a way that limits environmental damage. In conclusion, although the debate on nuclear waste is the most controversial part of nuclear power is nuclear waste, the public perception of nuclear waste is wholly reasonable. After all, information regarding the durability of nuclear waste storage containers and the development of nuclear waste in Finland isn't exactly information that's easy to find. But they do show that nuclear waste can be stored both safely and securely, and in a way that makes environmental damage not an issue. And with our help, hopefully, one day one of these facilities can be built in the US so nuclear power can be more prevalent. Thank you.